My name is Matt Barton. I'm the curator of recorded sound at the Library of Congress, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to a very special Live at the Library event, which is a conversation between Jad Abumrad and Jim Metzner. Jim Metzner's collection is with the Library of Congress now. 100 years ago, in December 2019, it feels like 100 years ago, drove up to his house with my colleague Michel Dubert-Bell-Richard and brought it back all the way down to Culpeper at the National Audiovisual Conservation Center, where we've been working on it. And I just want to say that if you haven't been to one of these Live at the Library events before, note that we do this every Thursday night. We stay open until 8 o'clock, and you can explore the library and its exhibits, participate in the various programs. They're different every week, including music, films, theater, and conversations like this one tonight. And we invite you to return, please return, with your friends and colleagues after hours for food and drinks, shop, take photos, and explore our amazing collections with our library experts. And one of the wonderful things about Live at the Library and conversations like this is that you can take a room full of people who may not have ever met, and at the end of it, they'll all have something in common, something they can talk about after the event. What I'm building up to is, please silence your cell phones if you haven't done so already. And now, thank you for joining us here at Live at the Library, and please welcome to the stage Jad Abumrad and Jim Metzner.
Hello, test. Can you all hear us? Okay. Hi, everybody. Jim Metzner, everybody. I'm here really as a fan of Jim's, as somebody who, speaking of 100 years ago, so back in 2002, I was starting a show called Radio Lab, and thank you. And as with so many things in public radio, it was a show that started with such great ambition, but with zero funding. And I had to fill 3 hours a week, and I was new, and I didn't know what to do. And someone said, call Jim Metzner. And I did. And he sent me a box of his things. Maybe it was a box, I don't know, a couple of CDs. And I was just thunderstruck. And it was one of the first things I heard in radio that really imprinted on me. And so I'm here as a way to take that early gift that you gave me and in a tiny way sort of share it with all of you and share it back to you. So I thought what we could do, this might be the last thing you want to do in a space that's this reverberant, but I thought what we could do is maybe play the first piece that I ever heard of Jim's, that I aired on Radio Lab, a big fat chunk of it. So you're gonna kind of have to like listen through the echo, but this is, when I first heard this, it just kind of changed me. So this is a piece, I don't know, when did you do Sound Memories?
Oh gosh, well, is it appropriate to say that I don't remember? But let's say in the mid-'80s, and it was the result of having a question about, a question you could even think about and let rattle around in your cage a little bit, which was, has there ever been a sound in your life that you could still hear even now? And a sound that entered and in a sense never left. And when I went around talking to people, some of whom I knew and some of whom I didn't, I struck emotional oil. And then it was a challenge of finding a context and maybe reinventing or discovering those sounds. So from the 80s.
Okay, so this is Sound Memories. Sunday mornings, I would be up in my bedroom early, and down in the kitchen, my mother would be making tomato sauce. And after the oil would heat up with the garlic, she would pour the tomatoes
in. And as soon as the tomatoes hit, there would be a sizzle. And I would hear that sound, and the entire house would explode with this wonderful aroma and this scent. And I never left me. And I can almost taste it as I hear it.
Hear my father in the kitchen singing toot 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 say goodbye, and he would just stroll up and down the hall in the house when I was growing up with his hands in his pockets, and I could hear the change jingling in his pockets because he works in Manhattan. Needs all the coins. In those days, you need coins for subway tokens, and he would be saying toot 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 say goodbye.
Toot 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 say goodbye.
My mother was Scottish, and every Sunday morning at 8 a.m. she'd put the pipes and drums on full volume, and I woke up to that every Sunday morning of my life. And that made a very deep impression on me.
It was sounds that got you out of the house. Maybe they drove you out. Maybe they drew you. Now, listening back, they're inviting you again. The fire alarm, the ice cream truck, the card that your friend attached with a clothespin to the fender of his bicycle made it sound like a motorcycle. Or the first time you ever went somewhere just to listen to the sounds there. It was underneath the Brooklyn Bridge. Sounds do have a life of their own. They can take you to undiscovered places. But more often than not, they'll take you back to the brink of a memory, to a moment that was catalyzed by sound.
When I was really young, I had a favorite uncle who lived with us for a while, who used to tell me stories. And we had this habit, he would stretch out on the floor and with a big bowl of apples next to him and tell me stories while I rested my head on his stomach. All of these stories were accentuated by the sort of the apple and sort of the sound of his breathing. And whenever I hear the sound of an apple being bitten into, there's a little bit of the
Once upon a time,
pleasantness that was connected with those experiences.
there was a princess who lived in a big castle. Want a bite? And then far, far away in the forest, there lived a very mean ogre. You know how many heads he had?
How many?
5. 5
1,
heads.
2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah. And this ogre used to eat little children that would come by in the middle of the day, or without their mommy and their daddy. He would eat them up just like this.
Just several years ago, on the west coast of British Columbia, I found an abandoned seal pup and spent the night with it sleeping on my stomach. And its cries awakened something incredibly maternal within me, something which I wasn't aware of. And I still hear those haunting cries that really settled into the core of my being.
I mean, it's just magical. It's just...
You should say this is an excerpt. It's not the whole thing. And before we get, I just have to say, before we get further in, I know you've sort of established a line. already, but I have to say thank you to the library. I have to say thank you to Matt Barton, to Sherry Werb, to the whole crew that made this evening possible, of which many people worked for. And it's a very long list, from the sound team to the people, to Elizabeth Schreiber-Byers, who worked on this incredible presentation. I just have to thank them all for allowing this to take place. So please, my thanks to them all.
I want to ask you about some of the transitions in what we just heard.
Yeah.
I think it's in the transitions where suddenly you're no longer listening to radio, you're having some kind of strange dream.
Can you hear me? You hear me? Okay, good. I'm sorry.
You go from, ever the sound man.
Yeah, I know, I can't help it.
You go from crinkling something to change. You know, you go from a crooner hitting a note to a bagpipe.
Yeah.
And then in that last transition, which is just so beautiful, you go from the sound of a little girl laughing to a seal cry.
Yeah.
Tell me how you were thinking about that.
Well, it's a journey of discovery, but at some point, there was one really, well, a lot of it was serendipity. The fact that she would be singing the song of Tootsie Goodbye in the same key that Al Jolson was, I did not create that, it just happened. What a piece of luck. Was it a piece of luck that happened, it was also in the same key as the bagpipes? Luck, serendipity. At least that's how it seems now looking back. But the transition that was maybe the most nefarious transition in the whole piece was, I'll put it to you as a question. When you were listening to the little girl and the uncle, and they're eating the apples, and you heard the yeah in the background, you weren't thinking seal pup, right? No, you had this expectation that that was the kid. And then all of a sudden, whoosh, that expectation of what you think that sound was or should be was turned on its head. That was an intentional thing. And I love the idea of putting into question the way that we listen, which is so often an act of, oh, I know what that is. That's a kid. No, it's not. And it's that on that cusp of moment that this journey of discovery could begin, of maybe questioning how we listen.
That's interesting, because in putting the baby seal against the baby human, you decontextualize both in a way, and suddenly you just kind of hear them as high cute things in a way, and you no longer somehow picture the thing immediately in its context.
Well, I think we all are. Maybe there's someone in this audience who is blessed with the idea of not being a labeler, but I listen to things mostly and label, and I go on to the next thing. But one of the big questions I have about what listening maybe could be is there a way to listen without contextual, putting things in a context, to hear it, as you were saying, as a pure sound for an instant? What if every sound, before we label it, has in it a kind of intrinsic magic waiting to be discovered, that the label, as soon as you pin it, like you pin a label on a dead butterfly, and it kills the sound. But what if every sound, virtually every sound, has that other quality?
Let's back up. When did you first pick up a microphone?
When did I first pick up my microphone? Well, when I remember the sounds that I remember, I don't know, how many, just quick show of hands, how many people went through the installation? Just curious. Whoa, there's a show of hands, nice. So do you remember, if you saw it or heard it, there was the one about my grandfather, Papa. And that was the first recording that I ever really remember having an intentional recording. It wasn't an assignment for school, nobody told me to do it. I was actually I was in drama school at the time. I never thought I'd ever be a radio producer. I just wanted to be with my grandfather and record him. I had a hand-me-down tape recorder, and I went to record my grandpa, and those tapes sat in the cigar box. The picture of the cigar box was in the installation, along with the recorder. Back in the day, that's when a tape recorder actually had this thing called tape in it. And it sat in the cigar box for 20 years and ultimately became a program. So that's the first recording I ever made. And I just did it because I wanted, because he meant somebody to me. And I had no other agenda that I wanted to record my grandfather. And by the way, if your parents or grandparents are still alive, if you forget anything else that we say tonight, remember this: record them. Okay? Just go out and record them. If not for your sake, for your grandchildren's sake, just do it. Trust me, you'll never regret that moment.
Well, you recorded your grandfather as an oral history, family oral history. But at what point from that point forward did you then decide, I would like to record the world, I would like to record for the radio? When did it become more than just a family thing?
A moment or two when I had a checkered career, which I will not get into, but I was an actor for a while. I was a musician, and then I decided to go back and reinvent whoever Jim Metzner is or was, and I decided to go back to school and study ethnomusicology. And in so doing, I had a tape recorder and I had a stereo microphone, and I can still remember the moment of pushing the record button and having a headset on and the stereo microphone, and all of a sudden, all this stuff started happening that was amazingly coincident. It just all started happening when I pressed that red button. And I was just surrounded by sound. And of course, the sounds had been going all the time. It was not a coincidence. I just started hearing it thanks to the microphone. And that was the moment where I sort of fell in love with the act of recording as a way of awakening to the sounds of the world. And at that moment, I thought, well, this is the coolest thing in the world. I mean, why isn't everybody out there doing this? Because it's obviously the coolest thing in the world. And I seemed to be the only one who was doing it at the time that I knew of. And so I just stood on every possible medium that I could think of. If you can make up, sound design for a choreographer, making CDs, making, not in those days, an LP. And then finally, the last thing, being a sound man on a documentary film crew. But the final thing, sort of the duh moment in current speak, would be radio. Duh, it's the listener's medium. Yeah. And so why not do that? So that led me to experimenting in radio. So that's the journey in brief.
Gotcha. What do you, this is sort of an unanswerable question, but somehow your work provokes this question for me. What do you think, what is the intensity of listening when it is being recorded? Or why the intensity of listening when it is being recorded versus not? I mean, any of us can stand in an echoey hall or in a under the Brooklyn Bridge or wherever and listen. But there is something quite intense and powerful when you actually are pointing it and hearing it. How do you explain that intensity?
Yeah. I would invite everybody here to let that question enter you in the process too. I mean, not just me, it's for all of us. And even the fact that we're all thinking about it will help the person who happens to be speaking right now answer this question. Because one thing that happens when we're all in the same room listening together is we become, whether we know it or not, a organic receptor for this idea that you just suggested. And it helps all of us, certainly me who happens to be speaking at this moment. Does that make any sense? You have felt that? So you mentioned the word intensity, and I would also evoke a similar word, which is an intention. I am going out to intentionally record or listen to this moment. in that sense, it's a little artificial because I'm not always artificial in a not so bad way, but it's artificial in the sense that you get a camera in your hands and you start looking in it, and all of a sudden, you know, look at this room. You start focusing in on, well, I'm gonna, you know, take a picture of that Cupid or whatever and focus in on that, and all of a sudden I'm seeing it for the first time. But wow, that Cupid is looking right at me. Yo, dude. But I hadn't seen it before because I just focused in with the camera. Well, a recorder is the same thing. You start to have the tape recorder, and then all of a sudden, that sewer becomes, that's not a sewer anymore, it's gurgling. Or in Japan, they don't call it a sewer, they intentionally design a thing, what is it? It's either a sui kinkutsu. Any Japanese speakers out here? Is that the word? A sui kinkutsu? Or what's the other one? A shishi? No, it's a sui kinkutsu. It's an intentionally designed, well, sewer, which sounds so prosaic, that has a beautiful soundscape. We don't have to go to Japan for that. You can put your microphone right there into that, and you start to hear the gurgles, and then you discover this microcosm of sound that, but for the microphone, you would have never discovered. So this microcosm becomes a way of evoking this beautiful subterranean sound, and then you can, you know, multiply that in magnitude. You go to Istanbul and go to the Basilica Cistern, and then there's this giant cavern larger than this space, and it's all one big cistern, and it's all sounding like that. But here you've got a similar vibe on a smaller scale. Does that touch on the answer? So the intensity comes when you start to be affected and start to have a feeling that, wow, I'm alive. These sounds exist. I exist in a world of vibration that is feeding me all the time. And so this microphone becomes a way, just like a camera is, of awakening me to the world of vibration. Then the intensity and the intention become this path. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right.
Now you just caught a wind, my friend. It makes perfect sense. I want to play you. I'm going to play you a tiny bit of you introducing a piece that you made for the Savvy Traveler, I don't know when. I believe it was about Morocco. But I just want to play you this little bit of you talking, and then I want to ask you a question.
A tape recorder is a pocket full of breadcrumbs. When you record sounds, wherever you go, you leave an invisible trail from moment to moment. And then one day, you listen to the tape, and you find your way back again.
How is a tape recorder like a pocket full of breadcrumbs?
Well, first of all, I like that image because it's an allegory that we can all relate to. We all know the story. I don't have to tell anybody what's a breadcrumb trail is. And maybe we all have had feelings of retracing our steps in some ways. But for me, when I make a recording, it happens in real time, and then it exists sometimes in a cigar box for 20 years, and you don't listen to it again. But then you have the opportunity of following this trail again. And maybe sometimes you'll never listen to it again, but sometimes you want to take the journey, the flip side of a sound recording is it takes place in real time. You have to invest a certain amount of time to appreciate, to take the journey again. Now, you can look at a photograph and an image and get it instantaneously. But sound has to, the appreciation, the re-appreciation, you have to be willing to take that journey again. So that comes back to, is this journey worthy? Do I feel that am I serving the sound by wanting to share it with fellow sentient beings? Is it worthy of your attention? What would it take to get somebody else who wasn't there to press that red button interested in taking the journey again? And that is the question every time you make a radio program, right? I mean, you have this moment and you want somebody else to share it, but they weren't there to press the red button, you were. So what does it take to get them into that? And how much information is too much information? In other words, I don't want to chew your food for you. You know what I mean? I want you to have the experience, but I want to give you enough of background that you can sort of feel like you're not, you have to have some kind of a sound prep. Like today in the installation, some people came up to me and said, geez, I wish I wanted to know what the sounds were. And actually we did have a list, but we chose not to put it in the room because I wanted people to have the experience of not knowing, but still be able to find out if they wanted to. So it's a real question and a balance. Whenever you make a radio, I mean, I could ask you the same question. When you're making Radiolab, didn't you feel like you had to serve whatever it was, you had to leave a certain amount of space but still help them, right?
I mean, yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about that because I always thought of it as holding versus seducing in some way.
Holding versus
like
seducing?
Creating a holding space and then seducing people into it in a way, so that they can play in it, but you don't have to constantly tug them through it. So it's interesting to hear you explain your choice of what sounds to play and how to introduce them as a way of seducing, but then letting people sort of have that experience of listening too. But I'm curious, like the breadcrumb analogy is interesting to me. You told us about your grandfather as the first recording you did. In a sense, that was a breadcrumb. It was put in a box and then you found it 20 years later. Tell us other stories of a breadcrumb that you followed back into a place you didn't expect.
Well, let me think about that for a minute. When you go to a place, I don't know if it's, maybe I have to circle around to that. You go to a place and you record stuff, and why you record stuff is sometimes a matter of serendipity, and sometimes it's a matter of intention. I'm going to this festival because I know a festival is a great place to be to record sound, but on the way to the festival, there's this parrot talking to a girl, and you just happen to stumble across that on the way, and that recording, in a sense, becomes more interesting than the destination. You got it?
I do.
All right, let's... That's a parrot. That's a girl. Now that's a trail that I don't mind taking again. I've listened to that hundreds of times. Every time I listen to it, it brings a smile. Maybe I'm picking up the breadcrumb.
Is that a parrot pretending to be a girl, or a...
That's a girl and a parrot in conversation in Portuguese. Fala Portuguese, anybody? She's saying, I'm mad at you, right? Something like that. You're mad at me? I'm mad at you. And, you know, it's just this moment, and they're just cracking each other up, and I crack a smile every time I hear it, whether I know Portuguese or not. I wouldn't say that's objective art, but for me it's close in the sense that I don't mind taking that journey. It's short, and it's a quick little journey around the park and an easy breadcrumb to pick up again. And in the context of an album, it was easy. A harder journey is when you have a longer story. How do you tell that story? What goes in the story? What is different analogy, but if each sound is like a little jewel, what's the necklace that puts it all together? What's the trail that it becomes a trail, a passageway? And you weave the story. And sometimes you make a mistake. Sometimes, it's too much talking, and sometimes it's not enough, but you learn as you go. So I don't know if that really answers your question. I feel like I've left the question hanging, but I'm going to think about it some more and let it rattle around in my cage.
Okay. Well, I want to play a sound. I'm going to play this cold, and then maybe on the back end, you tell us what it is.
All right, cool.
All right, where was that? When was that? What is happening? Who are those voices?
All right. First of all, everyone in this room already has a picture, an idea. You've labeled it whether you like it or not. And I just want to say to you that maybe some of you are going to say, when the words that have come out of my mouth to ID it, you're going to say, oh, I knew it. I knew that's what it was. But that doesn't discount what you thought. Every thought, every response you had, whether you labeled it or not, is entirely valid. As valid, maybe even more valid than what I'm going to say, than what it is. Do you know what I mean? That's the point of what we're circling around. Okay, so I'm in my 20s. I'm in Brazil. I somehow convinced the Brazilian government, in an enormous act of chutzpah, to transport me and everybody knows what chutzpah is. I know how to do it. I just want to make sure we're on the same page in that one. And Jay Mazel, wonderful photographer, to get Jay and I to Bahia, the northeast coast of Brazil, the place where African slaves were originally brought to that country, and it remains to this day, arguably, a heartbeat of Brazil. It's where the music of Brazil, I feel, came from, arose. And in Bahia, in Salvador, Bahia, the capital of Bahia, every day as we were walking around recording stuff, there would be this enormous crowd of people, thousands of people. And in the middle, there would be like an arena, almost like a boxing ring. There would be this evangelist, and he was preaching to these people. And they would have, and this back in the 70s, they would have the worst sound system than you could possibly imagine. You know, crummy little speaker. And so I could not record that on the fringes. To record that, you had to go through this crowd of people into the center. Now, and we passed it every day, and I said to Jay, I got to go in there. And Jay says, are you kidding? Were you nuts? Because, he was right, of course, because these people were in a very different state. What do I mean by that? Imagine, picture, thousands of people, some of whom would have a scarf in their hand, some of whom would have a photograph, a piece of clothing, a memento, and thousands of hands held aloft so that the vibration from this evangelist could come and heal them or the person that they brought it. And they're in a frenzy, and every once in a while, somebody would just fall on the ground and start clawing on the ground, stuff like that. So when I say it was in a frenzy, it was that kind of a vibe. Nobody in their right mind would walk through that crowd. But I had my magic headphones on and my magic wand, which is a microphone. And I had this tape recorder, and it's like you have this cloak of invisibility or something, this protective cloak of whatever that's going to get you through, like whatever the guys at Hogwarts had, except it's real. At least that's the conceit. And there are other recordists out there, right? Tom Miller, you know what I'm talking about, right? You have the microphone, it's like, yeah, I can do this. And so I said, I'm sorry, Jay, I'm going to do it. And he said, be my guest. And so one of the few words I knew in Portuguese was desculpe, which basically is excuse me. And I started to desculpe my way through the crowd, holding this 3-microphone array. And then at some point, as the crowd sort of parted, Mazel, who wasn't going to let this 20-year-old upstart upstage him, is drafting my wake. So we get our way, we disculpe our way all the way to the middle of the thing, and there's the stage, and I didn't know what was going to happen. You know, they could look at me and say, who are you, buddy? They looked at me, and they saw the microphone, the magic wand, and the guy's assistant gives me his hand, and he pulls me up, and whoa, he pulls me up, and then I'm on the stage, and I'm surrounded by thousands of people and this evangelist. And at that moment, this woman, this moment that we were hearing, gets possessed. And he jumps down, and I jump down with him, and I'm right there, and she starts screaming, and he grabs her by the hair and pulls her up by the hair. That's the scream, and he shouts out, "Embora, embora, away to dispel the spirits. The scream came perhaps as a result of having her pulled up by the hair or whatever, but that's the moment. Now that may not correspond to what you thought, but please don't let it replace what it was that you had, which is every bit as valid.
I mean, it does make me wonder, what's the most dangerous situation you've placed yourself in to get a recording?
Well, that was one of them.
Yeah.
That was one of them. I mean, well, all right, so just to show you how dangerous that could have been the week or two after that, and I have this press clippings to prove it, police came along, the crowd rioted, and people were killed. So it was a dangerous situation. But one other, also in Brazil, that came to mind, I'll tell you quick, because I'll try to shorten the story. We're riding in a car up to Feira de Santana, where it's cowboy country, and I see in the car that there are cowboys in the distance, and they're herding their cows. And I knew that there was something that they did when they herded their cows. There was I'd heard about it. I'd never heard, no one had, that I knew had recorded it. It was the aboyo, the call of the vaqueros, the Brazilian cowboys. Stop the car. We get out, and I'm recording with a Nakamichi 550. Anybody know the machine? Nakamichi, big sucker, 8 size D batteries. This thing is the size of, it's like not much smaller than that loudspeaker right there. It is huge. 3 microphone array. This thing, and I go running up to the cowboys on their horseback.
Should I play it? I can play it while you, can I play it and you tell it? You think we could do that, or?
I'd rather have the sound state, or you want it after or before?
Okay, no, keep going.
Okay, here we go. You're the man. So, I go up to the guy and I say, "Eu faço disco músico brasileiro." That's the only Portuguese I know. I'm making a recording of Brazilian music, and by gesture and everything else, I communicated that I wanted to record the aboyo somehow, and he looked at me like I was nuts. Like, no, you want me to come down off my horse and do this for you? Not going to happen. The aboyo is for herding cows. You want to record the aboyo, Mr. Guy with all this? You're welcome to, but you're going to have to keep up with us, because when we're doing it, we're not doing it for you. We're doing it to, to herd the cows. And I got it, and I said, okay. Now, the cows had very long horns, pointy horns. These are big cows with pointy horns. Just hold on to that image if you can. And so I'm out there with all this, it's a big herd of cattle, and they're singing the aboyo, and I've got my cloak of invisibility on, I'm very cool, and nothing can harm me. And so I'm out there, and they're singing the thing. I'm in recorder heaven. And then one cow looks at me, lowers his head.
Oh, shit.
And, claws at the ground and takes off right at me. It was very obvious that he was heading right for me, not over there towards me. And, your life flashes before your eyes, visions of the schmucks at Pamplona who actually race the bulls, and, it's like that, and get gored by them and all of that. That's me. I'm out here. What a stupid thing I just did. And there's no way that I can outrun this thing. He's coming right at me. And I had this vision of, all right, I'll put the tape recorder in front of myself. No, I can't, it's my tape recorder, I can't do that. And I was just like frozen. He's coming at me, and I have to say, in the last possible second, the cowboy who had seen this, casually, too casually from where I was standing, trots along, and they have sticks. They didn't have lariats or anything like that. They have a stick. And at the last possible millisecond, he just comes on. He doesn't whack it. He just goes, pop, just like that, and then sort of veers off.
Wow.
And I'm going, it's like, anyway, that's the preamble to it. Now, you won't hear any of that drama, sorry to say. But you'll hear the app. I mean, that just would get, it's a nice story, but it would get in the way of the recording. You don't want it to be about me, you want it to be about them. So here it is. Wow, isn't that great?
Yeah.
Up.
Wonderful. It's interesting to hear after that nightmarish scenario you just painted, because I'm like, that chills me out from the intensity of almost getting gored by a bull. So it's like you told that in the right order, is what I meant to say. You know what's interesting? That I was listening to your sounds in preparation for this, trying to figure out why they work so well, and you don't really hear it, what I'm about to say, in that passage. Maybe I'll call up a different one of yours. Let's see if I can find it very quickly. If not, it's going to take me too long. But if we think back to the faith healing one, in so many of your recordings, they have this really interesting quality where you hear one thing in the right speaker, you hear another thing in the left speaker, and you as the listener are somehow in the middle listening to some kind of conversation between them. Many things happening at once. Is that you mixing sounds against each other, or is that you standing in just the right space?
Usually the latter. I do very little mixing. I don't even know if we have it on the docket, but there are a couple of recordings. There's that one of the Boa Morte thing where it's the bells and the fireworks and the marching band. People say, oh, you mixed that. And I said, no, it just, that really happened like that. I was in the middle of it. Or the one with the rain, and maybe that's the one you're thinking of, but we have Eileen, my wife, is a great gardener, and she's putting out plastic in the garden to prepare the soil to get rid of the weeds so we can plant stuff. And so I was out there. Did you find it? No.
No.
It doesn't matter. But I'm out there. I'm with an umbrella, and it's raining. And just imagine you're in the umbrella, under the umbrella, and you're hearing the pitter-patter of the rain on the umbrella, and it has a certain rhythm, and it has a certain sound, and it's sort of parabolic, sort of. So you're right in the middle of that wonderful soundscape. But then the rain is also hitting this big plastic sheet, which has a completely different aesthetic. And in the distance, and you're in the middle, you're in this natural mix. And I remember talking to the kitchen sisters who are here tonight. I hope they're here tonight. Hey, hi. Bless you both. Emissaries of sound, the kitchen sisters, everybody. Radio royalty in the house. I remember years ago, I remember talking to you incoherently, I was, about a natural mix, this idea of being amidst a sound where you're not mixing it, the world is mixing it, but you happen to be in the middle of it and privy to that thing. That's what if I seek out anything, it's seeking out the sweet spot where, okay, I'm in the middle and there's these two vibrations, or I'm in the middle and there's a playground, and then there's a bicycle, and there's whatever. So you're in the midst of it. That's the natural mix.
Yeah, I was thinking specifically of a recording you made of a woman singing "Amazing Grace." Sounds like almost like like Salvation Army kind of situation where there's like a jingling bell, someone's singing, there's somebody off to the right yelling about the person singing, and you as a listener are in a quadrangle between all of these sounds. It's a very interesting listening experience. It's not a passive listening experience. You're constantly kind of wavering your focus. It's quite different. When you set out to record these things, are you going out with an agenda? Are you saying, I am going to capture the faith healers, or I'm going to capture Rain on the Roof, or are you just kind of wandering out and waiting for something to happen?
Well, it's a little bit, I try not to use, I mean, it's words, it's all words. It's a valid word, but I try not to use capture. Then it feels like, if you stumble on it, it feels like a gift. So it's not like I went out to get it like a hunter, game hunter. I was out there and just listening, and it came to me, and it becomes like a gift. And then, of course, you want to share the gift. But it's usually a bit of both. You might, like I said earlier, you might want to intend to go to the festival, but if you run into the parrot on the way, that's all grist for the mill. So you want to be open, but there's nothing wrong with having an intention. But if you have blinders on and you're only going to do that, you're going to miss the rest of what's going on. And then that sense of being in the midst of it, a little bit of it then in the craft of recording, as all you sound recordists know, you become there on behalf of the person that you want to share this with. And so if you're recording binaurally, which is a set of microphones that fit into your ears, and then it's hearing the way that you hear, if that makes any sense, because that's a way of recording, then you have to be there on behalf of your listener, so that, first of all, you're not going to, because that would really screw up the recording big time in the middle of you. But then, less obvious, you can't be turning your head around all the time, because that's, then you've kind of screwed up the recording. So when you're recording binaurally, you're kind of being this Tai Chi person who, if they're turning, you're doing it very slowly, because you want your listener to know that that's right, that's left, and that's center, and then everything else happens, you're in the middle. But if you're turning ahead, they won't get it. So that's being there on behalf of them in the future. So it's a bit of keeping that in mind.
All right, I guess I have so many more questions, but maybe I'll ask one more question and also prompt all of you. If you have questions, begin to let them bubble up now, because I'm going to throw it to you guys for Q&A. One of the interesting things about your body of work being now a part of the Library of Congress is it's now history, in a way. And it just makes me wonder, like, if you were to start your career now in 2023, would you go about it the same way? Would you grab a mic and a tape recorder? Or would you find yourself as a YouTuber? You know, do you have a sense of how you might live the life you already lived in the present?
Well, one thing I wouldn't do would be to schlep a giant tape recorder
Right.
the size
now
of
it's this big.
Yeah, we're all, first time in human history, we're all walking around with tape recorders in our pockets. And 2 bits, and I hope, I'm going to let you do the selling, I hope you'll mention the selling message, sorry, in a minute. But AmericanSoundscapes.com is a website that I created. Doesn't cost anything, it's not a money-making operation, but it's an invitation for you who are first time in human history walking around with a recording device in your pockets. You can make excellent recording with these iPhones or whatever, to share them with others. So on AmericanSoundscapes.com, it's a context where both you can crowdsource your sounds and also hear the work of some of the best sound recordists in the world to do that. So all right, to answer your question, that's something that I've done in this time that I would have killed for a recorder like I have now, which is, you know, a very good sound recorder back in the day. But you know, now we have things like podcasts, which have already changed the core. I mean, radio is still alive and well and changing as, again, it's not dead. It's alive and well, but it's morphing. And this thing that we call podcasts still would enable anybody with a good idea to create something. So I guess if I was doing something now, I'd try to find a good idea and make it into a podcast. But even before that, to keep the act pure, I wouldn't think about podcasts in context necessarily. I'd go out still with the best sound recording device I could have and a way of monitoring it, which is crucial, not just hearing what you think the recorder's getting, but knowing with a pair of stereo headphones that I would do it just for myself again and again and again and see the material that ends up being gifted to me, because everyone in this room could go in the same space right now, go out in Washington, and every one of us will have our own journey. You'll have your own breadcrumb trail, and every one of them will be valid, because you'll hear stuff that would never occur to me. Gee, I would have never thought of sticking the microphone in the sink or wherever it is that you want to put the microphone. That's your journey, and it's all valid. So I would find my journey and see where the see where the trail would be, and see if it's worthy of going there again, and then let the material tell me where it wanted to end up. And maybe it'll tell me, no, it's not a podcast, it's a new context that maybe you'll figure out amongst you, because there will be new context. You know, I don't know what the next thing beyond podcasting will be, but somebody in this room will probably invent it. And maybe it won't be the internet. I hope it's not the internet, you know? Maybe it's something else.
Yeah. All right, who has questions for Jim?
Yes. Oh, hang on. We have a microphone coming to you. There it comes. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. I wanted to ask if you had any mentors or personalities in the radio business that influenced you along the way. Or other, you know, creators from TV or motion pictures that played a role in your development creatively?
Thank you. No, I didn't really. Maybe a guy like David Lewiston. I mean, after I started on the journey and I started doing stuff, and then I discovered people like Tony Schwartz, who was a genius, and I realized, wow, he was doing stuff like I'm doing now, but he did it like 40 years ago. Tony's an amazing guy, and Matt Barton can tell you more about, and the Kitchen Sisters can tell you more about Tony than I can. But when I finally met him, I realized, wow, we're sort of singing in the same choir. In fact, when he signed his book over to me, that's what he wrote. But he's this amazing sound recordist, but it was after the fact that I discovered him. But Lewiston was a guy, there were these series of none-such albums, like Golden Rain, and there was this one recording of something called the Ketchak chant. You know, if you heard it, the monkey chant. My God, what a sound. It's like, I heard that, and it was like, I'd never heard, I grew up as a, you know, a kid who grew up in Queens, New York. I never heard stuff like that. It's like, I want to do that. I want to be like an ethnomusicologist. I'd like to record stuff like that. So he was an influence. But beyond that, you know, it was later on that I discovered Tony, or people like, who's the guy who wrote the soundscape guy, Murray Schaefer. After the fact, you know, the soundscape man wrote Tuning of the World. And then I realized that there were other people who were doing things sort of similar to this. But, sorry, long answer, but no ostensible mentors, except maybe Lewiston. They're coming at you.
Nice to see you again, Jim. Over the course of your career, have you found sounds, is the planet becoming noisier to you? Or how have you noticed sounds evolving over time?
What would you say? How would you say? I mean, I'm interested to hear.
I'm thinking about, for me personally, I became aware of it becoming noisier on multiple trips back to specific countries on the continent of Africa. And over time, as humans have encroached, as populations have grown and humans have encroached more and more on what used to be wild spaces, I've noticed the sound differing there.
Right.
And I noticed traffic here, so I'm more aware of the sound here. So I
Right.
guess that's my frame of reference.
Right. I would agree with you. And then there are moments like the pandemic. If there was a silver lining to the pandemic, I'm sorry, that's a hard one to swallow, isn't it? But things did get a little quieter, a little less traffic, a little less air traffic. You got to sometimes take the good with the bad. And yet, there was a moment, an epiphany I had. I was in New Zealand. I've always wondered, and I'm so glad you asked this question because it gives me a chance to present this idea, similar to what we talked about earlier. Is it possible? So, all right, I'm there. I'm in New Zealand. I'm listening to a recording. I'm making a recording, and I'm near a road, and there are birds in the trees, and the trees are sort of rustling, and there's a farm in the distance. There's all this going on, and then the road, every once in a while, a truck goes by. Okay, so the unwritten rule of being out in the soundscape and the truck goes by is expletive deleted. Oh man, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. You had to drive your truck at this moment? I'm recording this pristine thing. No. What if we just included it and didn't exclude it? What would that mean? It means I have to find another way of listening. And so I've tried to see in that moment to include and even welcome the truck and see if I didn't label it as truck, but thought of it, experienced it as a color, as a texture. It wasn't truck for a minute, it was rough, it was gray, it was a thing that didn't have a truck attached to it, but a texture, if that makes any sense. Could I listen to it that way? And then all of a sudden it became a bookend, because the fact is that I don't know how to listen to natural sounds the way I listen to music. I can listen to 20 minutes of music like that, but unless I'm out there with the magic wand in my hand, it's a tough journey to make the breadcrumb trail journey again, because I really haven't spent my life listening to sounds. It's a confessional here. I don't know how to do it. But bookended by the trucks, all of a sudden, they became the beginning and the end of an orchestral piece. And the trees that became this sort of wash of sound, the breeze going through the leaves, that sort of, I don't have the word for it, it somehow dissolved everything. Things dissolved into the branches of the breezes of the trees. And the bookends, the beginning and the end of the orchestral piece, was the truck or the grating sound. So all of a sudden, I was grateful for the truck because it created this space of 30 seconds of other stuff that I could relate to. Does that make any sense? It's another way of listening that all of a sudden I thought, wow, hypothesis proved it can happen, at least for me. It's subjective. What would happen to me maybe wouldn't happen to you. So it's a suggestion of maybe a way of listening where we say, all right, for better or for worse, we're part of the world. Can we include ourselves? And of course, there are limits to that. Would I want to record every sound in the subway of New York, in the 14th Street subway, where it's going to be harmful to my inner workings? No. So within reason.
That's really interesting, Jim. I mean, it's like, I wonder, sorry to piggyback on your question, how long do you have to listen before your brain stops hearing a sound of a truck and forming a picture of a truck? How long do you have to listen for it to go that to die and you just hear gray? It's almost like, it seems like an act of mindfulness in a way.
A what?
Act of mindfulness in a way.
Well, have you ever had an experience akin to that yourself?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's like you start to hear frequencies and not things. They're no longer objects. They're just you know, well, that's 100 hertz. You know, oh, that's 2.2. You know, you start to sort of think of it in those terms in a very engineering kind of way. But I don't know, I'm curious, like, it struck me that might be one of the things that happens as you hold the magic wand.
Well, you're way ahead of me in terms of what you did on the Radio Lab as a sound designer, because you, like all these incredible, I am not a sound designer, but a sound designer can, you know, Ben Bird or somebody like him hears a fluorescent light bulb and say, ah, that's or a blowtorch. That's not a blowtorch. That's a Jedi lightsaber. And they start to think of sounds in that way. And my God, you must do that all the time in the Radio Lab when you were creating your backgrounds, right? You started to think about sounds non-intuitively?
Well, yes, but I get the same itch when I hear your work.
Ah, a good itch.
They start to pull apart from their context. Anyhow, back to you guys. Questions? More questions?
Yes. Hi. Wait, hang on. Yeah.
Thank you for talking to me earlier today. You know, I really appreciated your wisdom and everything you were talking about. But continuing on the same logic here, you know, I always wondered, you know, for a visual photographer, for example, they have a visual design elements that governs them to see the world and go after some things to capture. Of course, you hate the word capturing, so I'm going to use it. But do you have that kind of a design in mind, something, you know, like when you are hearing? And if so, now that the podcast and everything is coming up, would you mind writing it down so others can kind of look for the clues? Have you ever thought of writing it down, what you are doing?
There's a segue. Oh, well, we have one thing that I have in the works as an answer to this trick. I paid him $50 so that he would ask this question. Thank you. That I have a book in the works. In the last, I'm up against every announcer in public radio now. The last 3 months, no less than three announcers on public radio have published their memoirs. So there's little old me with a memoir in the works. The working title is Adventures of a Lifelong Listener, which I will have to change now because the wonderful Ari Shapiro has a book out that has virtually the same title, but he got it out first. You should all go out and buy Ari's book. But then if you want to be put on the mailing list for mine, just go to that same AmericanSoundscapes.com and put yourself on the mailing list for it. And there are slips back there where they have other stuff for sale to do that. But in a sense, it'll be answering, I hope, your question, because in the end, I would like to explore the question of what the mystery of listening is. Is it just corresponding to images, as you, just is not the right word. Is it corresponding to images, as you're suggesting? Maybe. Maybe listening is, maybe the images are all in your head. Maybe it is imageless. Maybe people who are blind have a whole other level of listening that those of us who are privileged to see the world are not privy to. Maybe there's a whole other way of listening that we don't know. So I would invite you and everybody else sometime to take a sound walk and get a friend, somebody you trust, and have them blindfold you and go out into the world as familiar as you are or may be, and just take 10 minutes and have them walk around and take a sound walk. You will have a journey of discovery, and I will bet you a nickel that you'll hear stuff in a way, because you're not seeing, because sometimes seeing gets in the way, of listening in a new way, which might answer your question. Invitation. Hi.
So I have to say, the sound memories, when you mention the subways, because I commuted on those subways 3 years in high school, and when I go back to New York, it's like that rush. Yeah. Oh my God. I'm surprised I still have hearing, but yes. I'm curious,
about the curiosity that drove you to where you collected sounds over your career. What were the pre-breadcrumbs that took you from one place to the other? What were the driving forces?
Ooh, I don't know. I'd be much more interested to hear what people like Tom Miller might say, but I would say the fact that there always, when I had that sort of epiphany moment, it was as if I was being invited. There was this tacit invitation that there was a journey to take. It was every bit as enticing as the kids who want to take the journey through the enchanted forest. That something out there is waiting for me. Maybe the idea that the experience that catalyzed that was some experience I had with Minor White. I was his assistant. Do you know Minor? His work, he's a wonderful photographer, American photographer, who, along with Ansel Adams, co-developed the zone system. I had the good fortune to be his assistant for a summer. And at one time, Minor said to me, there's something out there, and we would be in the middle of Capitol Reef, Utah, in the middle of nowhere, which was somewhere to Minor. And he said, there's something out there that's waiting for me to take its picture. I don't know what it is, but it's waiting for me. And I took that as a mantra, that maybe there's something out there waiting for me to record it. And I would say that there is something or someone waiting out there for you to record if you have that itch. And that I can't find that for you. You have to take that journey. But only you can take that journey, and it's worth taking.
Well, I really feel like the bad guy in this radio show. But it falls to me to thank you all, really from the bottom of my heart and everyone who's worked on this. Thank you for coming. And could we have a big round of applause for Jad and I'll call him the founder of this sonic feast, Jim Metzner.